Thank you everybody for joining us today. If you're new to Sterning and our purpose events, we run these webinars pretty much every month. We used to do them face-to-face, but now during this time we've moved to a webinar series, and we have a number of experts coming on and talking to us about what's happening in their industries or talking about their areas of expertise. I am Emma Egan and I recruit in the HR space, and we have Andy Wright joining us today. And Andy's the creator of Never Not Creative, the co-chair of the Mentally Healthy Change Group, and MD of Streamtime. He has held really senior positions within design consultancies and knows the industry very well. Streamtime actually supports the design industry. So he's going to share with us today the latest research from the 2020 Mentally Healthy study and talk about what's changed over the last couple of years and what the plans are for the future to help people in this industry. And Andy and I were just talking and saying that a lot of these things do cross over to other industries. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand it over to you. Oh, sorry, housekeeping. Sorry, guys, housekeeping. If you want to ask any questions or anything, just down in the chat box below, you can use that, or you can use the Q&A box if you want to do it that way. So either or, we will see your comments or your questions, and you can ask at any time. We will cover them either during the event or after the event. Andy, now over to you.
Cool. Thanks very much. Thanks so much for inviting me and having me on as well. So, like Emma said, yes, I'm doing a few things at the moment. So I have been in agencies a lot of my life, and moving to, I guess, running a software company has just has its different challenges, but gives me a little bit more headspace. And so over the last couple of years, I set up a community for creatives called Never Not Creative. And I'm currently the co-chair of a group that sort of came out of the work that we were doing there called the Mentally Healthy Change Group. And actually, here they are, or some of them. So this group basically came out of the research that we launched in 2018 around mental health in the industry, and I'll talk to that a lot more shortly. And people just came out and were so passionate about wanting to be able to do something about the challenges that we faced around mental health that the lovely Nina Nyman from Unlimited, who's in the top left of that shot there, and a bunch of us, Nina and I basically run this group now. We meet once a month, and we go through just all of the initiatives that people are working on. And it's quite amazing just how much, because people are there off their own backs and they're really passionate about something, just how much we get done. And I'll talk to some of that in a little bit. This is my day job. So Streamtime is project management for the creative industry, and basically any industry that has a sort of professional service that sells that has to do estimates and quotes and invoicing and scheduling their teams and managing projects. And so that's what I do most of the time. And then Never Not Creative was set up to fill in the gaps of things that just weren't being addressed in our industry. So that's around better recognition for creatives and how we talk about our work. So like around the education of the value that we provide. And, you know, everyone thinks that they're a designer, but it's very different when you start doing it yourself, and there's a value to that. Improving mental health, because basically witnessing over the years a lot of mental health issues in the industry, and trying to work out like actually what can we do about that, and can we quantify it as well. And then we're also doing, so we set up the Mentally Healthy Change Group. We've also got an internships change group that is about support for emerging talent. So helping people get a better start in the industry, and specifically tackling internships head on. But today is all about mental health. And so I'll tell you a little bit about kind of my own journey with it as well. So, well, I'm trying to think when this was now, probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was having some challenging times with my mental health, and I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And in a kind of weird way of trying to cope with it, I was around the same time I was asked to do a presentation at Creative Mornings. And if ever you've done a presentation at Creative Mornings, there's a guy that's kind of scribes your talk as you're doing it. And this is my picture from the talk that I did. And the theme I was given was risk. And so I thought, oh, well, there's nothing more risky than talking about coming out with like having a mental health problem to a bunch of strangers. And so that's what I did. And ironically, I kind of find it much easier to talk about stuff to strangers than I do people that are really close to me. So actually, in a way, it was easier. And for the last sort of, I guess, I was at that time, I was running a business with a couple of co-founders that we'd set up called For the People. I'd also had my third child. And, you know, there was just the stresses of running a business and, you know, having a kid that wouldn't sleep for the first year of his life. And with a bunch of different things going on, one night I kind of like suddenly started getting these pains, like shortness of breath. Went to see my doctor. She sent me straight off to hospital. And this is where I'm terrible. But this is how I told my wife I might be home a little bit late.
Oh my goodness.
Kind of the selfie text message, I know. And it was really to say everything was all right, because if you read into those little wavy lines at the top there, I think everything's fine. But I think that point when I ended up there was like, you know what, I actually have to take a little bit more control of this. And, you know, it's important because, you know, there's other people in my life. So this is our family. They're a little bit older now. But yeah, and it made me think a lot as well, like, you know, am I the only one experiencing this? Is this happening more and more often elsewhere? Obviously, since coming out and talking about it, I think, you know, you naturally attract people that also have had this happen. And I started Never Not Creative, and people answer these questions as they come in to the group on Facebook. And you know, I just pulled out 6, but I could pull out 600 of these quite easily around like, what is the biggest challenge you think is facing the creative industry? And there's just so many references to burnout. And I remember at the time as well, like going to conferences and basically creatives were talking about burnout as part of the process. And, you know, sometimes you have to go through that, and that's okay if you've got to go through it, but I think we've got to get better at actually handling it and recognizing it. So it led me to this point to go, like, how big is the problem? Is it now me and my bubble? Like, is this what I'm just seeing because I'm kind of naturally sat in the bubble? Or is it a kind of, you know, big problem that actually needs addressing? And so I was lucky enough, it's funny, I actually went to another conference called Purpose. And I saw Jay Lee Skian, who was the director of Everymind at the time, talk about a study they just done into small businesses in Australia and their mental health. And I said, hey, can we collaborate on doing the same study into the creative industry? And she was completely up for it. And so we sort of joined forces. And at the same time, Unlimited, who are the foundation for the creative media and marketing industry that help connect people in that industry with charities to do kind of great work helping youth at risk. Nina said that they were also looking to do something. So we basically came together and built this study. And just so you know, like the importance of this study is that it's not just me on SurveyMonkey. It was these people running the study. They're paid to do this. They're like doctors and professionals and professors. So it's a very credible study. And we basically found out a lot about our levels of mental health in the industry. And so the first one we did was in 2018. The second one we did was in 2020. And we literally closed the study just before the pandemic hit.
Wow.
And so what we have is a great snapshot of kind of what things were like before, but we were very wary of, like, has this put actually a whole bunch of other stresses onto us? And has that changed anything in our industry? So we did another quick snapshot where we followed up with about 500 more people to understand whether anything had changed significantly. And actually what we found was there weren't that many bigger kind of short-term differences in the data collected. I'll pull out some of the differences, but I think there is likely to be more longer-term differences, but certainly we didn't notice too much of a difference in the questions that we asked. So this is a good way of kind of explaining the difference between 2018 and 2020. This time around, we had about 1,600 respondents, which is just a huge sample, really. Even if you were to look at any other studies into this space, not just in our industry. And so in 2018 versus 2020, 56% of our industry displayed mild to severe levels on the depression scale. Wow. And that's actually very similar. It hasn't changed too much between the 2 years, but you can see sort of on the right-hand side of that chart that we're certainly, you know, getting up onto the kind of extremely severe. That one is growing on that side, and that's 42% of people kind of experiencing moderate to severe if you kind of take the sort of middle to the right hand side. And it's very similar for anxiety as well. And the purple blocks are the sort of national average. So you can see that this, everyone, we know that depression, anxiety are a societal issue as well. But I guess in this, we are specifically looking at the creative media and marketing industry, and it does show that it sort of skews higher. And when you look at actually right on the right-hand side, like we're talking about 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 showing severe symptoms of depression and anxiety, and that's basically double the national average. So that was a worrying figure in 2018. It's still a worrying figure now in 2020. And, it's obviously a huge thing to try and just say, well, we're going to rid it. But there are things I think about how to cope with it and how to talk about it and how to basically manage our industry and our sort of day-to-day jobs to show that we can still function. Because the really interesting thing about this is that we're still doing amazing work. Right. This
absolutely.
is
imagine if it was really addressed. The productivity and the creativeness and everything that would come out of it would be incredible.
Yeah, 100%. And that for me is like the really kind of encouraging sign. Is like you're pretty happy with like the work that's getting done now. Imagine how it could be. One of the things that was really interesting in this is just this. There is a real kind of issue around sort of presenteeism in our industry, and it's not necessarily that you're forced to work when sick, but there's this kind of expectation that you will and that you don't want to let anyone down. We also found that about you're working at about 40 to 50% productivity when you are sick, and so whilst you're trying to help, it actually might be that the work you're doing isn't the best. But we did have really good news in the survey. And when we set up the group, we sort of asked the group, like, what do you want to achieve as a group of people trying to tackle this? And everyone sort of said, like, we want to hit the stigma part. And so that was what we chose to focus on with all the initiatives that we did in the last couple of years. And what we found was that between 2018 and 2020, 24% more people would consider disclosing being diagnosed with depression, which is a really encouraging sign that we're actually helping people get more confident about being able to talk about it. And 22% more people believed that others wouldn't be treated differently. And so these are quite big gains because the stigma levels were high, and they were higher than other industries that we'd seen. And so these were big improvements. So it's encouraging to see that people are a little bit more confident to have that discussion. The challenging thing, obviously, is that as you're trying to talk to people who might be experiencing it kind of directly right there and then, they are naturally kind of predisposed to thinking that they're not going to get treated well. And so it's quite important that we kind of keep reaching out to people. So we'll dive deeper into some of the results. This one is, it didn't change no matter what the kind of situation. So the pressure of our own expectation is the thing that we're putting the most stress upon. Now, there's no doubt that kind of there is a sort of culture that produces that. We're probably even taught it as well as you kind of come through education and university, for example. But there is this kind of constant, like, always we can be better, and we're always looking up for kind of like where we could get to rather than actually looking where we've come from. And so this sort of pressure of our own expectation is the thing that always comes out on top. And you can see that it's still at the top of the list through 3 different surveys.
Andy, it's really, sorry, just to not interjecting, but it's really interesting looking at this because the COVID times, like it's gone down a little bit. Do you think that's because they're not doing massive hours in the office?
The ranking was very similar. So if you look, yes, everything did drop slightly. I think COVID, I mean, it's hard to say because it wasn't specifically about COVID, but I think, and from other research that I've seen, like COVID has been a bit of a leveler, right? Like even if you're losing your job or things like that, it's not because of your performance, it's because of the world's gone to shit. Right. And so I think there's times when if you're worried about your job because of your performance or the direction of business is going, then you might feel that you have some element of control over that. And therefore some of it is your fault, but in this latest situation, it's most of the time out of your hands. And so a lot of people in the same boat. So I can't say for sure that that's it, but I think there's some sort of logic to that. And you can see here like things that did jump up, like we concern about the future, obviously
and sense of isolation.
Yeah, exactly. And sense of isolation increased as well.
Yeah.
Interestingly, like the hours there, and you sort of alluded to it there, like working from home, are we a little bit more in control of like the way that we work? And there's some stuff later on as well about people want more. Before COVID, people wanted more flexibility, and potentially they were just given it. We did have a little bit more flexibility around working from home, and I think everyone probably appreciated getting rid of the commute. I know we've got a few people in our business that would commute an hour and a half. Day, and so to be able to get rid of that is certainly nice. So there is, I think, we're almost back to the sort of like the Mad Men days. There's still this kind of like, I feel so much pressure to put my job first before anything, was one of the things that one of the respondents said. And this, I think sometimes it goes unsaid, and sometimes it's said and I'm still amazed. And this person was saying, I've found whenever I've tried to implement a healthy boundary in the interest of preserving my mental health to provide the best work possible, it's been met with a response of, if you were truly passionate, you'd want to work on this until 2 a.m. and on weekends. And it's kind of like, I don't know, I've sort of managed to be able to remove myself from it, and so it makes me more, shocked as well when I keep hearing these stories. And we don't want this. This industry doesn't need to be an extreme sport. Like this isn't the industry where you're going to have a career that lasts 10 years and then you're going to burn out and we can't all become pundits like in football. So I think that it's this thing where the reality is people are going to work really hard because they're passionate about an industry that they managed to get into. We don't have to then force it further, because then actually that's when the kind of fun comes out of it. And this person said, like, we currently try to be madmen at every point in time. Everyone is forced to constantly present themselves as a genius and knows everything. Like, just
that's hard work.
I know. Imagine like you have to come into work every day thinking about that. And I know young creatives at ad agencies who they don't even know what they're on the next day. So they come in and they get told that they're going to be going into a meeting on this, a meeting on that, and they've got response to this brief. And they might tackle 3 huge problems in one day that they didn't really have any chance to prepare for. Imagine just doing that again and again every single day. It's really hard. Good news, we are seeking more help than ever before. And it was really interesting, like, 84% of people said that they were seeking help from a friend or family member to discuss their own mental health problems. And so, the fact that just that many people were reaching out, there's not many left then who are keeping it inside. And so that reaching out to friends and family is a good first step. And I think it's important with, there's initiatives that are helping people do that more often, making sure that those friends and family know what to say. And remembering that, you're not suddenly therefore an expert, you just are there to be able to help. And you just need to listen and point someone in the right direction. And so the other good thing is, like, people are, seeing their GP first, and that's great. We've been pushing that a lot. There's the mental health plan that you can get from your GP that helps you with sessions and to kind of monitor you and to sort of put a bit of a support network around you. So that's a really good idea. More people are seeing psychiatrists and psychologists. And, you look here as well, like 44% of people are looking to talk to their boss, their colleague, or an industry peer.
That's
so
good.
it just shows that kind of stigma has improved. The interesting one, and I'll talk to this a little bit later, is the sort of the low take up of workplace specific people. So people that might have been put into kind of an employee assistance program or a mental health officer still remains pretty low. And I think that's quite an interesting one to sort of tackle in the future.
Maybe it's concern over privacy.
We've heard that a lot. It's basically, even though it's put up as a private program, and that you're not going to have things disclosed, it still feels like it's for work. The other thing is, I think a lot of that stuff has a positioning issue. If you go into a workplace and you see the employee assistance program poster, there's a very high likelihood that it's going to be on the back of a toilet door. And so if you're putting things on the back of a toilet door, you're kind of suggesting that this isn't...
You should hide it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because what we do in the toilet, we hide. And
yeah.
so I think there's a bit of a positioning challenge around that, because if you want it to be out in the open, then put it out in the open, if you want people to take it like that. We did check on diagnosis and treatment. So 38% of people said that they'd had a diagnosis by a health professional of some sort of mental ill health. 44% had had treatment as well. The other interesting things, so like how are people symptoms like this, sleep, and that you can read so many different books and articles and whatever around the importance of sleep for your mental health. Only half of our industry are getting a good night's sleep, and that's it's hard to say what causes what, whether it's bad sleep that causes anxiety and depression, or whether it's anxiety and depression that causes bad sleep. But we certainly know that many people talk about, and this is in the study, that it's very hard for them to switch off from work. When you're especially in sort of an idea generating role as well, like you're constantly on the go, and it's very hard to just lie down and not think about that the idea you were working on today or the brief you were working on. So it's this sort of finding ways to be able to switch off are really important. When we launched the study in 2018, one of the headlines, even though we didn't even ask a question about it, was this assumption that alcohol was an issue in our industry. And so we wanted to make sure that we asked that this time around in 2020. And it is like 44% of people are drinking at risky levels.
Wow.
And the other thing was like 51% increased their consumption of alcohol during COVID as well. We also looked at drugs, and drugs wasn't as bad, but this is above the national average. And so, 1 in 5 are drinking 6 or more drinks at a time every week, which is essentially, this was all based on the World Health Organization's audit test that they do to track alcohol consumption. So it is a thing. And like people were talking about it in the survey as well, like, there was quite a few references to alcohol, and the industry needs to stop its binge drinking culture. Whenever we celebrate or commiserate anything, the first thing we do is raise a glass.
Grab a bottle. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, there we go. You went for a bottle. I was just going for a glass. And, again, not necessarily causal, but certainly associated. People with high levels of depression and anxiety are 3 times more likely to be drinking alcohol at high risk levels. And so, it's only sort of increasing that factor. During COVID, so I mentioned, this question was, how did your use of the following increase or decrease during the period affected by COVID-19? And you can see here that 51% of alcohol. So, that's not good. But there are some good things in here. And I think what COVID did as well was like, it just encouraged all of us to connect a little bit more, because we were kind of forcing it. And it was a good thing, like to connect more with people over the phone and video chat. It was almost like we were making a bit more of an effort. And 47% of us exercised more. And so that's a good thing. Maybe offsetting the alcohol, but it's good. And we're eating healthier food. And and I've seen other studies that say that, like, people's exercising more during COVID and their intention to continue that moving through. So then we looked at solutions, and there was some kind of good news and bad news. So workplaces are definitely taking mental health more seriously. But it was a really interesting pattern to look at that versus the kind of priority that a business places on mental health versus the effectiveness of that. And so the main thing to kind of point out on this slide is that if you look at the 2 extremities, so not at all and high, from a priority perspective, that's pretty low and it's good, and it seems that businesses are starting to tackle it. And you look at it at 28, nearly a quarter of businesses there are placing a high priority. This is important to say here, that this is people's perceptions. So it's not necessarily like, effective isn't, we haven't qualified that. It's basically someone saying that I don't think they're effective. But when you look at that kind of like, yes, people are putting it as a priority, a business is putting it as a priority, and then you look at the same for effectiveness and it's really low. And so we sort of dug down into that a little bit more, and came up with the fact that we need to tackle the heart of the problem.
Yep.
not the edges of the problem. And so, you know, at the heart of the problem is the 95% of what leads to the stresses in our day to day, which is the actual work and the relationships that we have at work, not the 5%, which is the perks that are sort of put in place to try and, you know, create a better, nicer workplace.
Yeah. A fruit bowl does not equal a wellbeing program.
It does not. It does not as yoga on a Thursday.
No.
And so people are asking here that what they wanted to see was for our leaders to lead by example, to help break down the stigma. You know, to hear this come up, you know, my
That's
manager
really
regularly
awful.
makes fun of mental illness. Like someone's working in the place right now and having to deal with that. And that's the kind of thing that really does need to be stamped out. This chart sums up this part for me, because the top 5 things here are, this is what people want to improve their mental well-being at work: empathetic, educated leaders, leadership who lead by example, appropriate structure and resources, flexible working conditions, and clear objectives. Now, this is to improve mental well-being at work. None of them say anything about mental health or well-being. They're actually the things that they think are contributing to them. At the bottom of the list is you could argue the way that we have tackled it, which is motivational posters, yoga classes, free healthy foods and snacks, mindfulness initiatives, mental health first aid officers, mental health education programs, things that are going, look, well, now we'll improve your mental health. And they're kind of, you know, the things that are reaction. They're actually like trying to treat the symptoms, not trying to treat the cause. And so this was so overwhelming for us. Like this top 5 are just leaps and bounds ahead of anything else on that list. And, you know, it's, I think, you know, flexibility, we talked about it earlier. This was someone who said, I have a flex arrangement for the first time in 17 years. The feeling of trust from your employer is actually empowering. Some days I work to 8 p.m. because I want to. Other times I'll finish at 3 or 4 because I can. And it's that kind of stuff that we want. And, you know, I'll still work till midnight if I want to, but I also want to know that I can turn off when I want to as well. And sometimes as well, we might need a bit of help with that. I do get people in our company who say, hey, what are you doing? Get off. Like, and it's good. So that's where we kind of look out for each other. One of the big initiatives that we launched last year was the mentally healthy minimum standards. And so this was a set of standards that we worked with the change group and industry to create. And they're not aspirational, right? You'll read this list and it's not necessarily like, oh, now we're an incredibly mentally healthy business. They're basically the line you shouldn't fall below. And so what we've been doing is we've produced these so that businesses could sign them. And we've had almost 100 sign the minimum standards to date. But some of them, the things in this are actually things that just exist in Australian employment law. You just might not know. So the things that you're supposed to deliver on as a business anyway. So we wanted to kind of see, I think they'd only been out sort of 6 or 7 months when we asked the question. So almost 20% said that they'd heard of them. Just over 10% thought that their business had signed. Interestingly, once we'd introduced them to the standards, only 20% of people believed that their business would meet the minimum standards. And so that's a bit of a worry because that is minimum standards. And just before we came on air, actually, we were talking about the things of like, you know, just this expectation around work. And so it's really interesting to look at like the opposite of this. So, you know, like we should really celebrate the people who are mentally healthy. And these are like the traits. So if you can find these people in your work, basically you want to try and clone them and you want to try and clone their behaviors because they don't come to work when sick. They're close to the people they work with. So having really good social connections at work is important. And I think there's a lot of people talking about this at the moment because how do you create culture and close social connections when we're all working at home? And so you kind of have to work extra hard at that one. They feel that their abilities are used well at work. And so job satisfaction is a really big indicator of quality of mental health. And again, it's not that sort of thing of like you're tackling anxiety and depression head on in a conversation. You're actually talking about like, are you enjoying your job? You know, and that's an okay conversation to have with people. So, you know, because that's about your job, it's about your work. And so it's also less daunting. These people have fewer responsibilities. Back to that sort of stresses list, multiple responsibilities is like in the top 3 or 4. And they've got good work-life balance. And so what that means is like when someone leaves at 5 o'clock, don't shoot them a frown. Don't think that this person isn't pulling their weight. Think that, you know what, that's great. They're getting home and they're going to come back refreshed tomorrow. Or they've got something on, because, you know, stuff that happens in life is just as important as stuff that is more important than stuff that happens at work. So I just wanted to, there's a few extra things coming up, but I just wanted to also shout out to Unlimited and Every Mind, because Every Mind, you know, Ross, who worked there, now works for New South Wales Health, is still involved in all the work we do, and he does an amazing job. And Nina from Unlimited is just like the best person to work with when it comes to anything to do with men's health in our industry. And then all of these businesses and organizations helped us to kind of get the survey out there. And so we basically couldn't have done it without them. And there's a full write-up of this on mentally-healthy.org if you want to go check that out as well.
It's really, really interesting.
So basically the way that it works now is that, and because this is how the Mentally Healthy Change Group started, is we sort of use this data now to set the agenda for the next 12 months. And so, you know, it's no surprise to actually look at the fact that what we're looking at right now is how can we tackle, I've got a meeting this afternoon. How do we tackle more empathetic and educated leaders? You know, that was the number one thing that people said they wanted. And so that's the thing that we're going to have a really good crack at. And I'm really excited because we've got people in the group who are like ex-head of people and culture at WPP, people who have run a brand at Telstra, ECDs at big advertising agencies. So it's really important that we can get into this space. And it's a really confronting space as well, because a lot of people will want to think that their businesses are great. You know what? Their business probably is great. And this is very much an industry problem, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to kind of tackle it.
Oh, Andy, I can put you in touch with some amazing HR people that can help you with this as well.
Awesome. Well, on the site, there's a place to kind of apply to join the group as well. So if you're in this industry, we're always open to people joining us. This was amazing. So this was in 2019. This is Chloe Hooper, who is a marketing director at PhD Group, and as part of our change group. And she came out and said, I want to train everyone in our industry in mental health first aid. And mental health first aid, it does sound a little bit dry, but I'll tell you, like, I'm the biggest advocate for this course because I actually just think it's a really good leadership course. And when we talk about having empathetic leaders, like once you've done this course, you're just so much more aware of what other people might be going through. And I couldn't advocate for it enough. And Chloe basically trains, I think 120, 160 people for free. And it was fantastic. So keep an eye out for that, because we're going to try and get more of those up off the ground.
I'd love to do it.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. As a result of a lot of events and stuff that we were doing, we've launched this initiative called Asking for a Friend. And it's in collaboration with Youngbloods, who are like the sort of anyone who's up to 28 in the advertising communications industry. And basically what we do is we team a creative leader with a psychologist, and we let anyone ask them anything anonymously. And it's the best session. And we've had some really like amazing sessions with industry leaders and psychologists. August event is coming up on the 6th of August. With an ECD down in Melbourne called Mossy from DDB, and a psychologist in Sydney, Julie Crabtree. And so all of those are actually on the site, and we're sort of curating them so that, you know, if you do have a question, there's a good chance it might have been asked before as well. And so you can watch all of the past sessions.
It's wonderful.
And then there's something I'm working on at the moment, which is called, I think it's like a working title, and I just made it up for this presentation, but NNC Circles. So there's a really cool group called the Banksia Project, and they run these things called growth groups or growth circles, something like that. And it basically pulls together groups of people who have kind of similar interests to talk about their mental health, talk about their experiences, and basically just create a safe, psychologically safe environment for people to talk about things that they're going through. And so we're piloting this soon with a group of creatives in Tasmania. And I'm kind of really excited to see whether we can then scale that, and Banksia are really up for it as well, which is great.
Excellent.
We created the mentallyhealthy.org website last year as well. And so there's a ton of resources on this. They're not resources that we made because we aren't the experts. We're just very passionate about it. But there are people who are the experts. And so we've basically brought in as many resources as we can. So there's a ton of stuff on this site that you can go and check out. Links to first aid courses. This is a really interesting course. The Being the Accidental Counsellor is a course that Relationships Australia runs. And it's basically that idea of, you know, you could get asked something by someone at work at any point. Yes. And it's, you know, this is how you can respond. There's some great stuff there. We've been doing lots of events over the last year and a half. I would recommend following these accounts. So I'm happy to distribute this afterwards.
Yeah, we'll share the slides to everyone after.
So Sean Hall, he's on our change group. He runs a business called We Are NGX. NGX is the business, actually. Mitch Wallace, who you might have come across in the past, he runs the Heart on My Sleeve movement. There's Mentally Healthy First Aid Australia. And so there's tons of really good conversations happening in this place, and there's lots of free events and resources to be had. And I think it's really worth going to go after them. So these are the standards. So if you're interested and you're in our industry, signing up to the standards. So bit.ly/mentally healthy standards is where you can go and do that. And these are the businesses that have signed up so far. And it's a real mix of, like, you know, big and small and across the industry. So we've had like the MFA, we've had down the bottom, like Hoyt's signed up in the last week, which is great to see. So big sort of media companies, as well as like really well-respected agencies as well. Like, you know, you've got Fjord and OMD, Facebook in Australia signed, O Media. Just like it's been really kind of encouraging to see people get on board with this.
Yeah, so important.
And so when we send this round, lots of links is what that slide says, and there are lots of links. So there's a ton of stuff in here around, there's links to the minimum standards, there's links to a full kind of research report that we've done on that research. What else is there? Podcasts that I run, the Never Not Creative podcast, which often touches on mental health and how to handle it. And and this is actually, it's a government website, which is obviously always a little bit dry, but Safe Work Australia, it's actually quite surprising how much stuff there is that the government will offer you in this space. And so I encourage you to kind of look into some of that stuff as well. Yeah. And
That's excellent. So, Andy, we've got a few questions here. Hopefully we've got some time towards the end. So one of the things, I guess, you know, we're talking about the creative industry specifically today, but do you have a barometer on what the stigma is like in other industries?
Yeah, so there was obviously, when Every Mind first did the survey, they did it across small businesses in Australia. And the stigma at that point in time was slightly better than our industry. I think it was like 36% versus 39% for our industry. But what's really interesting is the guy that we worked with on the research also worked on a program called Mates in Mining. And so he's measured the stigma in the mining industry. And so, like, have a guess what the stigma in the mining industry is based on your...
Pretty high.
You'd think so, right? Like, you'd think, you know, bunch of blokes not very good about talking about mental health, but the stigma in the mining industry is at 21%.
Wow.
And so it's that, for me, was really surprising. I guess, you know, at first glance, it's this kind of stereotype of the mining industry, but then you start to look at the dynamics, and we've started to kind of look into this in a little bit more detail. And it's really interesting because, like, the camaraderie that's created in that industry, it's fly in, fly out, like you're all on site at one point in time. And so that's really interesting, like that you kind of create these really close connections. And also, you know, you're a captive audience for any programs that are done to address this kind of stuff. It's fairly low hierarchy, and it's really clear on objectives. So if you look at that kind of, you know, those 5 things.
Yeah, the first 5 things, absolutely.
Actually, the mining industry ticks it off pretty well, and the stigma is low. So it's not as simple as that, but it's a really interesting comparison. So one of the things we're looking at is the other industries that we can look at to try and learn stuff from them.
Yeah, that's cool. And another question here, how does an individual start the conversation with their business to improve their support initiatives for mental wellness?
So I mean, the one thing I've been encouraging people to do is to introduce the minimum standards to their business. And, you know, if the minimum standards aren't quite right for your industry, or if you're in a different industry, there will be something. And, you know, again, like I said, like Safe Work Australia and that kind of stuff has things. But I would use that because it's not a personal thing then. It's actually quite objective. And it's just this thing of saying, hey, I came across these the other day. Do you think our business would be able to live up to them? Like, could we sign them? And I've had someone approach me recently who's done just that. And it's kind of helped grease the wheels for a bigger conversation around mental health. Great. So I think that's a good place to start. I also think the other thing is, we have lots of people in the Asking for a Friend session talk about, you know, we're kind of more and more asked to open up at work and bring all of ourselves to work and be a little bit more vulnerable. But then, like, how vulnerable is too vulnerable? It's not enough. And so I think the thing that we always say back to that is, like, it's good to share what you're going through, but also there's a certain amount of responsibility on yourself. And so, you know, like anything at work, if you come with just a problem, you're not going to get a great response from your manager. If you come with a problem and how it affects them and you and a potential solution, then you're going to have a much more productive conversation as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what it is about, like, mental health stuff is, you've already proved you can do your job, right? If you're coming to them, you've got a job, you're probably doing it pretty well. You're asking for them to understand you a little bit better, and showing that, you know, you could maybe be even better in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Another question here: have any design and creative education institutes signed up, I guess, to the minimum standards?
Let's have a quick look. So AGDA signed up to minimum standards. I guess from that point of view, it's more sort of an endorsement of the standards. We did. I don't think this has ever been done before. We got 9 industry bodies in a room at Facebook and presented the results to them. So at everyone, and so you can see here as well, like the MFA signed up to the minimum standards. I haven't had any universities, I don't think. But what was interesting is, like, the MFA now are kind of like all for it. They really want to tackle this head on. And I think what people are looking for from, you know, design institutions or just kind of any industry body is just, like, have a point of view. Like, if you're not going to tackle it, that's fine, but just say you're not going to tackle it.
Yeah.
And rather than just sort of just let this conversation happen out in the ether without having any sort of point of view on it.
Oh. And what was the most surprising thing to you about the results?
The most surprising thing was this sort of like, it's just overwhelming. We're asking for leaders to step up, you know, like the voice of, you know, the people, for something, not trying to sound too cliched, but I could give you like another 100 comments to talk about leaders. And, you know, the thing is that I don't think that, like, none of this work is about a kind of witch hunt of people that are contributing to mental health problems. I think what we have to do is just understand what everybody is going through, and then we have to help them in that way. And that's why, you know, I've been asked in the past, like, why this is mental health stuff and it's really important, so why just do it for this industry? And it's like, well, because we understand this industry, and yes, there are mental health problems across the world, but there are dynamics in our industry that we can maybe do something about. And so I think there's, you know, really interesting things around just making a leader's job easier, helping them connect more with themselves, helping them understand, like, I want to do this thing in, if you go and work for McDonald's, you have to spend time on the shop floor, right? You literally cook fries, dangle bags out of windows, mop the floor. And it's this great way of just understanding what other people in your company are going through. And, you know, there's leaders in our industry that have been in our industry for years and years and years. They will forget what it was like to be at that level, or what it's like at that level now, because things have
because things have changed.
Exactly. So to try and get some sort of empathy back in, I think, is a really good initiative that would essentially we might take a look at. So yeah, this sort of overwhelming push to leaders, the fact that, you know, yoga classes on a Thursday, fruit bowls, they're all nice. Definitely have them in your business. They're great. just don't think that they're going to solve any mental health problems.
No, it's a re-education process. Andy, thank you very much. We've answered the questions, and it was really informative today, and we really appreciate having you here. We'll send out the slides to everybody that attended, and thank you for joining in today. If you do have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Emma Egan, send me a message, or Andy, and just ask him any questions directly. But thank you very much, Andy. We're very grateful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you can grab me on LinkedIn, any of those things on that slide as well. And yeah, it'd be great to catch up.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.